Thank you everyone for joining us for today's webinar on mindful parenting. My name is Molly Buss and I'm the Community Relations Manager at the Earl E. Bakken Center for Spirituality and Healing. And my role for today's webinar is to assist with answering any logistical or technical questions in the chat. Before we get started, I just wanted to give a quick introduction of the Bakken Center for those that may not be familiar with our work. It is our vision to advance the health and well-being of individuals, organizations, and communities through integrative health and healing. And in an effort to make our programming accessible during the COVID-19 pandemic, we've been hosting several free webinars and providing other online resources to help you take charge of your health and well-being. And I'll share more information about that via email after the webinar concludes. Today, I am delighted to introduce Dr. Mary Jo Kreitzer, founder and director of the Earl E. Bakken Center for Spirituality and Healing. And Mary Jo will be contributing to the webinar as a presenter, as well as moderating the Q&A segments of the webinar. Mary Jo will share a bit more information about our other presenters. But before I turn things over to Mary Jo, there's just a few logistical items I want to cover to help you navigate the webinar functions. You're welcome to share your thoughts and comments via the chat box, and there will be some opportunities where we may ask you some questions. And if you're comfortable and want to share your responses with all participants, you should be able to click on the to field. There's a little drop down arrow and make sure you update that to all panelists and attendees. And then just note that you do have the opportunity to minimize the chat box during the presentation, and we invite for you to do that during the components that are interactive to help you stay present. There's also a Q&A icon where you can submit your questions for the presenters, and Mary Jo will ask our presenters as many of your questions as we have time for throughout the session. And please feel free to submit questions as they come up, as we'll have 2 opportunities for Q&A during the webinar. If you aren't able to find those icons, try hovering your mouse over the bottom of the webinar screen and they should pop up for you. We will send out an email with a recording of the webinar and other resources on mindful parenting later this afternoon. So without further ado, I will now turn things over to Mary Jo.
Thank you very much, Molly. And good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today. We planned this webinar prior to the murder of George Floyd and the events that followed. While we are aware that it's a challenging time for all of us, we also know that for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, that it is even more so. We originally intended to highlight mindful parenting through the lens of COVID-19 pandemic in this webinar, but will now enlarge the discussion to include parenting and caring for children during challenging times. These topics require multiple and diverse forums, and we hope to examine them through the lens of well-being today, as well as within future webinars and articles. Following this webinar, as Molly said, we will email you a link of mindful parenting resources that will include some social justice resources. In collaboration with university and community partners, we hope to expand our resources and the center's website and programs to include more information on equity, diversity, and inclusion, and why all are critical components of well-being. Please know that the Earl E. Bakken Center for Spirituality and Healing and the University of Minnesota are deeply committed to addressing systemic racism in all its forms and to the well-being and flourishing of all members of our community. Following the death of George Floyd, University President Joan Gable took strong and deliberate actions to uphold our shared values as a university community and committed to work to advance solutions to the many challenges we face, including the diseases of COVID-19 and systemic racism. At the center, we stand with President Gable and are listening to community leaders while keeping this time of pain and change at the forefront of future decision making. For the remainder of this webinar, I will serve as the discussion moderator and facilitator, and I look forward to hearing from you during the 2 discussion periods we have planned. 3 faculty were involved in the planning of this webinar. Dr. Mariann Anderson, Mo, is an integrative nurse clinician at the University of Minnesota Masonic Children's Hospital and a faculty member at the Bakken Center. She works with children and families around acute symptom management as well as helping them establish lasting self-care practices. Mo is mother to a toddler and a newborn baby, so she will not be with us today, but we're grateful for her contribution to the webinar. Dr. Doug Kennedy is a faculty member and researcher at the Bakken Center and brings extensive K-12 and higher ed teaching and intercultural competence experience to his work at the Bakken Center for Spirituality and Healing. He is the proud father of a 15-year-old. And Mariann Johnson is a mindfulness and wellbeing instructor at the Bakken Center. Since 2011, she has designed and taught mindfulness programs in a variety of business and community settings throughout the United States. Mariann helped raise her now adult niece and considers being an auntie to children, biological and otherwise, one of her most important roles in life. I'll now turn this over to our 2 presenters, Mariann Johnson and Doug Kennedy.
Thank you, Mary Jo, for that really lovely opening. Happy to be here with all of you today, and I thought I'd start by just going over what we're going to cover today as kind of a grounding. As Mary Jo said, we've expanded our original topic now to, as best we can, deal with the unique stressors that are surrounding us now, not only the pandemic, but also the recent events surrounding the death of George Floyd. We'll also practice, we're calling this mindful parenting, so we're also going to practice mindfulness meditation. And as Molly mentioned to you earlier, we're going to have 2 separate, we're calling them conversations with you, towards the middle and end of this webinar today to engage you in our conversations around first caring for ourselves and then caring for our children. So we're dividing the Q&A and conversation in that way. And then we'll also present our own strategies for you as well to discuss. And then I also wanted to mention to you, and I think this is really important, that families and parents and caretakers take many different shapes and forms. There can be single parents and like myself, aunties and uncles and grandparents who may be biological and otherwise, who are caring for children. Adoptive parents, again, many different shapes and forms, and we'd really like to be inclusive when we're talking about caring for our children throughout this entire webinar. We know that it takes a village to raise and to parent children, and I think we're all villagers. That's probably why you've joined today. In whatever role that you play, we're also villagers. So thank you for being here today. I thought we'd start with what I like to call an arriving exercise. You know, that notion of be here now sounds really nice, but it isn't always easy. And my guess is that some of you have been at work and just jumped into the webinar, maybe you've been working around home or wherever you came from. Let's all give ourselves a breath or 2 to just arrive now, to be here now. So if you'd like, maybe just taking a moment to even just arrive here into the room that you're sitting in, or feeling the comfort of sitting in the chair that you're in right now, your feet on the floor. Letting go of, as best you can, all that's already been today and what's yet to come, and just arriving. And to help us do that, maybe together we can take 3 deep, full, and satisfying in-breaths and out-breaths. And as you breathe out, an invitation to just let go as best you can of holding or expectations. Thank you for joining me on that arriving exercise. I enjoyed having an opportunity to replenish and renew myself. So I'm going to now turn the presentation over to my esteemed colleague and also my office mate, Doug. So I'm going to let you take over now.
All right, thanks a lot, Mariann. I just want to point out a couple of things that this pandemic really represents just rapid change and disruption on an unprecedented scale. And as human beings, we're really hardwired to respond to these stressors through fear, anxiety, loss, feelings of disequilibrium. In fact, just a couple of days ago, I was reading in the New York Times where they were talking about that foggy-headed feeling that you're experiencing is actually your body responding to stress, that this is actually really, really normal. But I'd also like to point out too that for communities of color, the stressors and the impact of this pandemic have been especially hard hitting. And then when we add the compounding effects of the killing of George Floyd by police and how this has sparked protests, outrage, and certainly feelings of fear within communities, some that have been longstanding around systematic social injustices, but also then really fear in the midst of all this. Times are challenging for everybody, and that these challenges aren't equitably distributed. We're seeing a lot of suffering in our homes, in our neighborhoods, and in our communities. This is a difficult, really, really difficult time. But in the face of all this suffering too, we're also witnessing unprecedented acts of selflessness, kindness, and compassion and generosity that can give us hope. As we turn our attention to what we're experiencing, when we look at the current situation as parents, as caregivers, we're experiencing both escalated concerns as we're worried about both people in our own homes and our loved ones, tremendous amounts of ambiguity and uncertainty around our daily routines, our future. Things like grocery shopping or going to the park suddenly become infinitely more complicated. We know that our work lives are changing, whether that's job loss, working from home, or working on the front lines, and certainly fears around economic security are a big deal for many, many families. And then for those of us that are now moving from being, if we're not full-time educators, to now being both parents or caregivers, educators, as well as breadwinners for our homes, this is really challenging for folks. And then we're also being expected to be, in a lot of cases, public health experts and monitors of the health and well-being in our own home. And all of this compounds to time that's lost, that's really unavailable for self-care, for the things that usually sustained us, hobbies or even exercise routines, much less time that if we share a living space with a partner, not having enough time there to attend to that. So, for many of us, and I'll speak even from my own experiences, just to talk about this raises a lot of stress. I can feel it in my chest. I can feel it in my hands, in my heart beating faster just thinking about it. And many times we compartmentalize so that we can just sort of get through the day. To bring it out in the open suddenly becomes rather fraught. And if you're feeling that, if you can relate to that, I'd just like you to know that you're not alone in it. And then there we go. So the piece that I want to talk about are what we'd call like the symptoms of stress, or this actually comes from the work of Peter Sandman. He calls them adjustment reactions. And Peter Sandman has done a lot of work on crisis management, working in pandemics. And he describes these things, as these automatic, temporary, potentially disproportionate, excessive reactions that we can all relate to, and that to effectively navigate them, we need some guidance and knowledge. So think of these as the symptoms of stress, and you could probably go through this list and go, yeah, I'm experiencing that. That sounds familiar. This really rings true for me. So when we think about what are these symptoms of stress? Well, we'd be talking about increased anxiety, irritability, and forgetfulness, kind of that foggy-headed feeling too that I was talking about earlier. Changes to our sleep patterns, diet and exercise, stress-related fatigue, and which can actually have this effect on depressed immune function too. And then almost inevitably miscommunication and increase in interpersonal conflicts. In the mindfulness courses that I teach here on campus, we talk about these having a tornado effect, that a lot of times, they lead to each other and they spiral around. So the lack of sleep leading to then increased anxiety or irritability, which then leads to more communication, and pretty soon it's a disaster. We add the additional stressors from outside or strong emotions to this, it can become really, really magnified. And we oftentimes don't find the ability to care for ourselves and show up in the way we want for our loved ones. So if we talk about the brain, right, if we talk about what's going on, there's kind of a normalizing that's happening here. And we could talk about stress for a moment. There's a cycle to this. When we experience stress, whether it's from our outside or inside, so we could have, the bear running at us, an external threat, or the feelings of stress from like an emotion or a thought, memories, for example. What our body does is it assesses the threat and then reacts to keep us safe. And it's particularly good at it. Now, the system that does that is called the autonomic nervous system. And if you've got children right now, a lot of times they're learning about this in school. They talk a lot about the amygdala. And there's a diagram here that shows you that midbrain region, this is where we talk about the fight or flight. So the autonomic nervous system is broken down into two parts. One is the sympathetic nervous system, and that has the amygdala. This is what kids learn about as the fight or flight response. Okay, we call it the gas pedal. It causes our body to speed up, to flee from danger. The other one is the parasympathetic. This is like the brakes. This is what calms our body down, enables us to take a break, right? This is what helps clear our heads and enable thought, okay? Now, there are times, and when I've worked in schools, we've talked about having an amygdala hijack or flipping our lid when we become so sort of stressed that we sometimes blurt things out or feel a need to flee. Let me give you a story to illustrate this. So my family and I were out hiking about 2 years ago in southern Utah, and my wife and child had gone off down the trail, and I had a brand new camera, and there were some pictographs on a canyon wall, and I wanted to go take a picture. And as I approached the wall with my camera, that's when I heard the rattle. And actually, even thinking about it right now, just that memory, I can feel the goosebumps on my arm, okay? So when I heard it, the messages came up my brainstem, and my sympathetic nervous system was triggered. I could feel my heart rate speed up. My eyes got bigger. I looked around for the threat, and I felt the need to run. What compounded it, kind of this tornado that we talked about before, is suddenly I had fear. I also had kind of this panic feeling like, oh my gosh, it's a snake. I'm going to get bitten. I might die. And then the thought started to go and magnified it. Oh my gosh, what's going to happen to my child? And it just spiraled out of control. I was able to catch it, though, thankfully. And what I did is, as I could feel that rising up and that swirl starting, I started to take a couple of breaths. And this all happened really, really fast. But as I took those breaths, I could feel my heart rate come down. I could feel that fog sort of lift from my eyes, and I was like, okay, well, what can I do here? And I looked around for the snake. And the snake had probably taken off. So this guy's panicking. I'm out of here. I don't want to have anything to do with him. He's crazy. He's going to step on me. But I realized that it wasn't anywhere near. It probably crawled under a ledge or something. And I saw that I had a clear path to the trail. And I was able to walk away and meet up back with my family. So no, I don't think this is unique to me. I actually tell this story in some of my mindfulness classes. One of my students who was staying with her mom in Arizona shared a similar story. She was out walking with her mom on a trail by their house, and they came across, as Rachel said, a huge rattlesnake. Both her mom, Rachel, they panicked. And then Rachel said to her mom, she goes, you know what? I know what to do. And with her mom, she said, let's take 10 breaths. They took some breaths. They were able to calm down. They noticed that the snake had moved on, and it worked. So it's not just, some guy on a webinar that this can work for. Two important takeaways for this, though. Number one, what I hope you can take away from this is that we can learn how to engage the parasympathetic nervous system. And this is really important because it can calm us down and help us respond better to stressful situations. The second one is this. Being able to calm down after a stressful situation is really, really important. Our body needs rest and rejuvenation, especially after stressful situations, because we've probably all experienced events where we felt really, agitated or stressed and just feeling and needing to come down. That's our body telling us that it needs to recover. And many times we push past it. Either we don't have time, or we feel like we don't have time, or maybe we feel guilty about taking rest. but this can actually be detrimental to our well-being, and it can exacerbate the feelings or the impacts of stress on our bodies.
Great, thanks for that story, Doug. I have a feeling we can all probably relate to similar stories, maybe not out in the middle of nature, but that sense of being aroused, so thank you. Simply said, there are a couple of ways, broadly speaking, that we can handle stress. Some are the helpful and adaptive strategies that you probably all know. And then there's what I like to call not so helpful, maladaptive strategies, the ones where we do a little bit too much, the overeating, the overworking, when we get stuck in ruminating thoughts. Those can all be really challenging for us. So what we're going to do with the remainder of our webinar now is to really focus on how we can help support our parasympathetic nervous system, how we can work together to create and learn more adaptive strategies, letting go of any thoughts of perfectionism, that there's any perfect way to do anything, but instead really supporting each other as parents and caregivers and learning new ways to deal with the difficulties that we're encountering right now.
So why is this important? Thanks, Mariann. This is about building our resilience. And the American Psychological Association defines resilience as the process of adapting well in the face of adversity or significant sources of stress. Well, if we make that a little bit more practical, what we do know is that when we take better care of ourselves, we're better actually equipped to handle stressful situations when they occur. And you can think of maybe stress as like this, like picture that you're standing in the ocean or on a beach somewhere, and that stress are the waves. When we're more resilient, we're better able to turn to the side when the wave comes in and it can pass us by. Or potentially, it can be that we're able to surf, right? Either body surfing or like a cork or a surfboard. But when we aren't able to be resilient, right? That's like when we tense up and the wave hits us and rolls us back on the beach. What we know too is we can actually build that capability with practices like mindfulness. We can actually expand this bandwidth to better be able to navigate stressful situations. We can actually generate or create a greater capability to handle whatever is thrown at us.
Thanks, Doug. We thought it might be really nice to take just a couple of moments for us all to reflect on now. What are some things that you've been doing to support your personal well-being and resilience over the past couple of months, over the past couple of weeks? So if you take just a moment or two to think about what you already know about your own resilience and how to engage that parasympathetic nervous system, how to balance a sense of well-being in your life. So if you go into the chat right now and just type in a word or a phrase of some things that maybe you've done yourself, or maybe you've been inspired by things that you've noticed other people have done, or maybe just when you reflect on other periods in your life that have been difficult, things that really helped you get through. If you just spend a moment now and in the chat box, and you can read right along as people are entering here too. Exercises coming up, breathing, reflecting on what you're grateful for, journaling, daily walks. Many of us are doing that. Nature, I'm hearing here as well. Family activities, spending time outdoors, drinking tea. Right? Somebody started seeing a counselor. Fabulous. Reaching out for help. Particularly difficult. Getting enough sleep. Supportive friends. A lovely list. The dogs are coming in now too. I'm going to let you read the rest of those. But it's just a reminder here that we do know a lot about how to establish resilience in our lives and build well-being. Sometimes we forget that, and it can be helpful to take some time to reflect, to remember, and create some space for those in our lives. I want to spend just a couple of minutes about what we know about resilience and the factors that support them. I call this list in front of you now the usual suspects, because these are the things whenever you go to your healthcare professional, they'll ask you, how's your diet? Are you exercising? And how's your sleep, right? Now, I don't want to minimize those because they're really important. They're like the building blocks. And many of us right now are reporting on difficulties with sleep. So caring for the fundamentals is really important. And then also learning how to handle stress. We call that stress mastery. How to learn how to engage that parasympathetic nervous system. And there are also some things that you may not suspect that also support resilience. Some of you already mentioned them. Social connections, a sense of community and support, reaching out. Sometimes when we're under stress, we isolate ourselves, and that can be very, very detrimental, not only to our physical health, but to our mental health as well. And having a sense of purpose and meaning in your life, living in alignment with one's values. Some of you mentioned gratitude and journaling. I'm noticing, and I know myself, I'm doing this, and members of my family as well, we're really evaluating what's most important in our lives right now and what we're recommitting ourselves to, what's crucially important for us. And that, having a rudder to fall back on when the winds blow, touching into those can be really important. For some people, that's faith in their lives. A positive mental outlook, an ability to regulate emotions. And I'm not talking about being Pollyannish here. It's really instead learning how to have, if you will, a broader perspective when things happen, stepping back a little bit so that we can also appreciate and see the small and sometimes bigger everyday things in our lives that hold goodness and joy for us. Reflecting on those can be really, really helpful. And then a sense of having self-efficacy, noticing the things that we can influence. There's a lot going on in our lives right now that we can't control, but there are many things that we can influence and have control over. And really seeing those and building on those can be really powerful, and committing to those on a daily basis. So mindfulness is obviously a resiliency tool. And I'd like Doug to talk about this now.
Sure. Thanks, Mariann. This is a definition that's been adapted from actually one of my teachers at UCLA, from Diana Winston. And there's a lot going on in this really pretty simple statement. So we'll spend a moment unpacking it. But if you can read along with me, it's that mindfulness is paying attention to present moment experiences with openness, curiosity, kindness, and a willingness to be with what is. Now, this isn't the only definition about for mindfulness. John Kabat-Zinn has one that's often used both in the scientific literature, but also out in the common spaces, in MBSR classes like that. But the definitions do share some common features. That this is an active process as opposed to passive, that we are actually paying attention in a particular way as opposed to just zoning out, being like a zombie or a blob, or just clearing our entire mind of any thoughts. We also bring certain attitudes to it, in particular openness and curiosity, and as caregivers to children or parents, maybe we can relate to this in a way that we've seen, for example, something new through our child's eyes, and we can absorb or kind of share in that marvel with it. And the other piece here is non-judgmental acceptance, or a sense of, can I be with that? And this part is really, really important. And again, it's because of the way that we're wired. Our brains do have a negativity bias. And as neuroscientist Rick Hansen describes it, our brains are like Velcro for negative events or negative situations or memories. And they're like Teflon for the positive ones. And there's some biological reasons for that. It helps keep us safe. But when we think about these things, like the negative events really have a hold on us. And in particular, in really stressful events, that inner critic really gets going. When we do this in our mindfulness classes and we ask students to describe an unpleasant event, they often report then the thoughts that they have along with it. It wasn't just they had a disagreement or that they had a mistake or they forgot something. It was usually some really harsh judgments around who they were as a person or their capabilities or their intelligence. So learning about this and bringing that non-judgmental awareness is really, really important, especially in times of stress. I want to make just one other note too about mindfulness, that we do see mindfulness and contemplative practices in lots of different cultural contexts and different contemplative traditions, that a lot of the teachers that we see in the US currently do owe a great debt, and they've brought influences in particular from Asia to their current secularized definitions right now. So I just want to make it really clear that this is a current conceptualization of it. It owes a great debt to many cultures and individuals. And it's not the only way that's out there, that mindfulness can look different in a lot of ways. There's not just one specific way, but this is a pretty good starting point.
So I also wanted to talk a little bit about mindfulness as being other-oriented. I think of mindfulness, sometimes people think you have to go away to a cave and a lot of navel gazing or something like that. But actually, mindfulness is extremely other-oriented. It involves social and environmental awareness. It's relational. These attitudes that we cultivate and we bring to our mindfulness practice, kindness and caring and compassion, really enable us, if you will, to be able to see and respond to others with greater sensitivity and understanding and caring. There's a definition that I'm familiar with of compassion, and it says that compassion is when mindful awareness meets human suffering. It's a very active role that mindfulness can play in our life, and compassion is as well. So I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes now talking about mindful self-compassion before we go into an exercise, a mindful compassionate exercise. I'm guessing that most of you listening to this right now have the ability to be really caring and compassionate with those that you care about in your life. But we oftentimes, particularly busy parents and caretakers, don't turn that same lens of compassion and caring on ourselves. So I think a fundamental role, and I was reading some of your comments earlier about the levels of stress that many of you are experiencing, can be really helpful to turn towards ourselves with that caring and compassion, treating ourselves the way we treat a friend who's having a hard time. There's a researcher whose name is Kristen Neff from the University of Texas in Austin. She's written a wonderful book on self-compassion and has a website. You can Google her name. Many resources also for parents there as well. And she talks about 3 components of self-compassion. The first is this self-kindness versus judgment that we can tend to have towards ourselves, understanding our own vulnerability and letting go of the perfectionistic tendencies we can have sometimes as parents and people on this planet. And then the second is this understanding that we all have a common shared humanity and that we all experience difficulties in our lives. So sometimes, again, we can isolate ourselves with that, and instead opening up to this shared humanity that we all have difficult times in our lives can be very, very helpful to help engendering self-compassion. And the third one is what she frames as mindfulness mindfulness versus over-identification. And what she means by that is this: mindfulness gives us this opportunity to step back and observe what's happening. Again, with those lenses of non-judgmental awareness and kindness and some caring, giving it some space so that we don't overreact, so that we don't over-identify with. We can jump right into our autopilot tendencies sometimes with that. So if you will, mindfulness is an antidote to that negativity bias. It could be considered that many of us carry. So here's a quote by a mindfulness teacher some of you may be familiar with, Tina Shodron, and she says, "Compassion for others begins with kindness to ourselves." Many of us as parents and caregivers really want to be present to children and to be able to be resourceful to them. It's important that we first, as the metaphor goes, put that oxygen mask of compassion and kindness on ourselves first. Doug, do you want to talk about
Yeah.
this?
Yeah, I really like this graphic because actually we have a mindfulness resiliency group in responding to COVID in my neighborhood. And we had a new person join, and they said, I take up mindfulness for about a week and then I get frustrated. And where it became frustrated is in this circle on the lower right here. So let's take a moment to normalize this, that when we practice, our mind will wander. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when and how many times. And so when our mind wanders off of the object of our focus, whether it's our breath or sound, if the breath's not available to us, or if it's bodily sensation, well, that's normal. What we need to pay attention to, though, is the inner critic that starts. So when the mind wanders into thoughts, that's not a problem. We just gently bring it back, as Mariann had said, even if we have to do that 10, 20, 100 times during a session. But noting that the words that we use with ourselves when it happens, like, I'm not any good at this, or I'm terrible at this, I'll never figure it out, is really important. One teacher that I like, that's out in San Francisco Bay Area, Paul Haller, has put it this way: when we notice that our mind wanders, we can't fail. There's no way to fail. Every time it happens, you can't fail. You've done it right. And just releasing that and enabling yourself to be like, okay, well, what if I applied that attitude to other parts of my life? What would that be like? I just think that's kind of a beautiful way of looking at it.
Thanks, Doug. So we'll practice now. We'll just take a few minutes. I hope you'll join me on this practice of mindful self-compassion. So let's just take a seat. Probably all seated now, but let's get comfortable in the chair that you're sitting in. Placing your feet firmly on the floor, if that feels appropriate and comfortable for you, and maybe taking a minute to roll up, back, and down the shoulders, and just getting comfortable. Throughout this exercise, you may choose to close your eyes or just have a soft, fixed gaze down on a spot in front of you, just to quiet the busy visual field a bit. It can help quiet the mind as well. So let's just settle in. Maybe taking a couple of deeper, fuller in-breaths and out-breaths if you'd like. And just bringing your awareness, your attention to the feel of the whole body sitting here now. Aware of the feet in contact with the floor. Noticing perhaps a sense of groundedness with the feet in the floor. Experiencing the weight of the body being held and supported by the chair now. The sit bones in contact with the bottom of the chair. The weight and the density of the body being supported. And then expanding your awareness of the body, maybe starting at the top of the head. Moving through the face and just noticing if there's areas of tightness or holding in the corner of the eyes, the mouth, the jaw, the chin, the eyelids, the necks, the shoulder. And just inviting ease as best you can. We all hold bracing and tension in our bodies, particularly during stressful times. And just inviting ease. Moving down through the body. Inviting ease. And when you're ready, if you'd like, becoming aware of the feel of the breath as it enters and leaves the body. There's no efforting required here. This body of ours knows just how to breathe. So just taking a moment or two to ride the natural rhythmic quality of the body breathing, the expansive in-breath, the natural letting go of the out-breath. And for the remainder of this meditation, I'm just going to gently offer some friendly, well-wishing phrases that you may just allow to wash over you, changing a word or a phrase, or just staying with the breath, the gentleness of the body being here now, if that feels more appropriate for you. If you'd like, you could experiment with placing your hands on your heart, or maybe on your belly, as just a comforting, soothing touch. May I be kind and caring to myself. May I gently and compassionately acknowledge my imperfections, my humanness, remembering that we all suffer from time to time as parents and caregivers. May I be at ease. May I care for myself just as I am. And now, if you'd like, expanding these well wishes, these wishes of friendliness and caring and support to all those listening to this webinar, and perhaps all parents and caregivers in our neighborhoods and communities. May we all be kind and caring to ourselves as parents, as caregivers, and villagers. May we all gently and compassionately acknowledge our humanness and support each other through difficult times. May we be at ease. May we learn all together to be more compassionate and caring of ourselves in service of the children we love and care for. And now, when you're ready, becoming aware of the feel of the body sitting here again, the feet on the floor, the hands resting wherever they are, taking a moment to take in a deep, full, and satisfying in-breath and out-breath. And we'll bring this meditation to a conclusion now. Thank you for joining me. You may want to do a stretch or look around the room just a bit. I'd invite you to just take a moment, if you would, to go into chat and just maybe a word or a phrase, what you noticed in that experience, that brief meditation that we just did. Just a simple word or phrase, a sharing, if you will. Seeing comments of peace and calm and forgiveness. Wow, I think that forgiveness is such a huge one for parents and caretakers. And serenity, calmness. Some of you also may have noticed maybe a sense of agitation or a really racy mind. And that's going to be there too when we meditate, just as Doug had said, and that coming home again. Some of you noticed a sense of comfort, being comforted and tired. Yeah, a lot of us are tired right now. Thank you for that. And again, I invite you to just take a few minutes throughout your day to come home to the breath and the body. They're always in the present moment. Talk about be here now. And learning how to just be with our breath for a few moments, or a more formal meditation, can be really helpful to increase our resiliency. Here's one of my favorite quotes from Viktor Frankl. Some of you may be familiar, it's an adaptation. Freedom is the ability to pause between stimulus and response, and in the pause to choose. I sometimes will replace freedom and say mindfulness is the ability to pause between stimulus and response. That pause is what mindfulness can give us. Out of autopilot, maybe a little less reactive and able to respond. I want to turn this over to Doug now to talk a little bit about some strategies first for caring for ourselves. Then we're going to move into strategies about caring for children.
Yeah, thanks, Mariann. Thanks for that meditation too. It was really interesting to see in the chat the comments that were there, and I was really struck by a couple of them. We're talking about how we do these practices in service of the children that we care for, and I think that's a really important point. I don't know about the rest of you, but I don't remember sitting in the doctor's office before my child was born, or the pediatrician's office later, and getting a handbook, or when I was in college, a handbook on how to deal with a global pandemic. So, these feelings of like, we're kind of making it up as we go along. And I don't feel like I have guidance on this. Well, you're not alone. But in this part, this is where we need to be able to forgive, ourselves and be kind. It's like, we're going to make mistakes, and it's not then that we'll be free from them and hope for perfection, but being able to say, okay, yeah, I blew it, and here's how I'm going to recover. I mean, in some ways it's similar to like when your mind wanders and you come back to the breath and having that kindness and go, okay, I've got this. That's really helpful. Mariann had mentioned, about doing your own oxygen mask, like when we hop on a flight, it feels like a long time ago, but when you have the message, do your own oxygen mask first before you help others with theirs. And that's it. When we're better resourced, we can actually show up better for the people that are important to our life, whether it's our partners, the children in our homes, or extended family members, even if we're connecting with them, through Zoom or Skype. What I'd also offer too is that if you can, and again, when people were chatting about the things that they're doing, finding time to calm and befriend your nervous system is really important, whether it's that cup of coffee in the morning. That's actually one of my practices, before anyone else in the house is up, and then a sitting practice. Find out what works best for you and stick with it. And again, it looks like this is going to be here for a long time. So this isn't a sprint, which is totally like parenting, right? It's a long period. This is a marathon. And as you think about that, pace is the key. Learn how to pace yourself. And Mariann's going to take you through those steps.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. So this PACE is actually an acronym that we developed to help us remember. It can be really trying. I was reading a comment that said, my kids are in the background and it's a little noisy right now. But this is something, maybe just taking those few breaths throughout our day and just remembering this term, pace. It's pausing throughout your day. Even sometimes, many of you have probably noticed just a breath or two can really reorient yourself. So taking a few mindful breaths, offer yourself and others some grace, some forgiveness. Many of you have mentioned, Doug mentioned it again. Acknowledging your feelings. Many of us have many mixed emotions and feeling right now. There can be strong anger and grief, a sense of loss, sadness, all those things are there. And really allowing yourself to feel them in your body can allow them and permit them to pass a bit more naturally and not build so much. Compassionately directing your energy towards things you can impact and control. Again, that notion that we talked about earlier, Kristen Neff's 3 steps there. And then engaging with others can be so powerful. That social connection, engaging and not isolating, asking for help. Some of you talked about that. Seeking out support. And those of you who have co-parents, checking in with them as well. Seeing what you can do the best you can to align on your parenting. And sharing your ideas and supporting each other as a community of caretakers, all of us villagers together. So I'm going to invite Mary Jo in now to engage us in a conversation.
So Doug and Mariann, some of the questions I think that are coming through really focus on parenting and the challenges of this time. And one question was, how much information should I be sharing, with my child about what's going on? And sort of a related question was, should I share my own fears and anxieties?
That's a great question. That's a great couple of questions. Mariann, would you like to address that first, or would you like me to take
Go
a stab
for
at it?
And I'll take it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there is really the consideration of what information is age appropriate for children. Um, and so being conscious of, a 2-year-old isn't going to really probably get into epidemiology or understanding the complexities of that, but addressing, okay, so this is what's happening, and not overpromising that things will be safe, but saying, here are the things that we can do to be safe. And here's what we're going to do to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves, taking care of our community, whether it's grandparents, neighbors, things like that. The other piece that I'd add too is that the kids are always watching us, so we need to in some ways be kind of that third party observer. And this is where mindfulness can be really helpful. It's that, okay, if I'm saying that I'm nervous, what is this in service towards, right? So if I'm modeling a behavior and how I wish my child to be resilient or to navigate it, I think that's really important. We're not stuffing our emotions, but we are showing, here's how an adult can actually work through them. Mariann, is there anything else that you'd want to?
No, I think you did a really nice job. I think kids are really observant. They know what's happening. And so giving age appropriate voice to what's happening and explaining things, I think, can be really helpful. The resource list that we're going to send out to you after this, by the way, has some age appropriate techniques and strategies for you too. I think you'll find that really helpful.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I know that I have heard lots of parents and grandparents when trying to kind of reassure children. Your point, Doug, the fact that all the things that you're doing to keep kids safe and to keep your family safe, to keep yourself safe, is a really good place to go. And sometimes being even quite specific that, we are staying home because we're doing that to keep ourselves safe. We're wearing masks because that's something that we can do to keep ourselves safe. So I also think helping kids understand that there are things that you can do to help control the environment around you can be an important strategy. Another question that came in, sort of a follow-up to this, in explaining things to kids, how do you address, sometimes things they've witnessed, like if they've witnessed rioting, the burning of buildings, anger and looting?
I'll start with that, Doug, and then I'm going to let you.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
the most powerful thing you can do in that instance, Mary Jo, is to bring your full, compassionate, mindful presence to listening. Really listening to what they have, bringing it out for them. And sometimes they may have a difficult time even expressing what they're feeling because it's so challenging for them. Giving them space and time, letting them know that you are right there for them. And again, for many of us, we're struggling with our own challenges right now. That's why I think this notion of caring for ourselves and why we presented that first can be so terribly important in order to be fully present and listen to our children.
Yeah, and Mariann, I couldn't underscore that enough. That listening and being really present is paramount. I spent 15 years working with adolescents. I'm the parent of a 15-year-old. It is a wonderful and challenging time for those of us that have parented through that. For those of you that it's to come, it can be amazing. But there's a great article that came out about parenting adolescents and why that can be such a clash time for adults and people of this age. And it's that, as that separation is happening, that burgeoning independence, it's that these children, the adolescents, are trying out new things. They're trying out, solutions. They're airing out ideas. And what we tend to do as adults is jump in to say, okay, well, you know what? I've been down that road. Let me tell you how to do it. But actually being able to be present, and this is where the skills of like, okay, I know that I want to blurt something out, and being able to say, okay, I need to be here and be present and listen, and we're modeling that behavior again is really, really important. And then asking the questions around, okay, is this a concern? Is this a fear? Is this a worry? And being able to both validate those feelings that they're there, And then when they're ready to bring in the advice, it's like, okay, so from my stance as an adult, here's how I'm wrestling and dealing with this. But again, it's coming back to that age specific, and adolescence, especially in issues where there's a lot of heat, this can be particularly challenging.
Well, there are other questions, but I'm going to turn it back to you, Mariann, because I know there's another slide or two, and then we're going to open it back up, and lots of great questions are coming in.
Sure. So, there were a couple questions in the chat about specific strategies for kids, and we've really covered this first one. So that's great. These age-appropriate conversations, addressing fears, it's fantastic. But I'd like to spend some time with routines. And actually, CNN had an article on their website today about, in these times of disruption, our routines have typically gone out the window. And this may be, even from things. Grocery shopping is now different. If an adult is heading out to work, sanitizing rituals are certainly different. But finding both the time where people are staying safe, being really clear about that, but then also establishing that time where there's together time. Because while kids are looking to adults for both comfort, security, reassurance, role modeling, they also need that connection. We're seeing this, we have this very independent 15-year-old, but they have this need to just hunker, to feel like I'm grounded with you. So finding time to celebrate. And if possible, taking in some green. The center has lots of resources about the healing power of nature. This is something that my family does frequently. Mo had shared a story too about how she does mindful nature walks with her child. This was before her second one was born. Paying attention to the senses. So it's really an important one. The other part, and we've kind of touched on a couple of these too, is that, when we work with our children, modeling these behaviors, it's right. It's like, especially now, we're making these implicit things that we know as adults that have been effective, and making them explicit. When I used to work in teacher training, we'd talk about like being vocal, like vocalizing what the thought process was to work through a problem. And again, whether it's showing listening, taking breaks, or I saw in the chat, a couple people had said, telling my kids that I need to take some time to restore myself is really important, but making these explicit, because again, like I used to tell our teacher candidates, the kids are always watching. And again, finding lots of opportunities to help kids regulate their own nervous system. There are a wealth of resources out there to help kids learn about their brain. My own child was in 3rd and 4th grade. They thought their brain was fascinating. So to talk about the brain, or to come up with routines that can talk about soothing, this is really, really important. And then also with the behaviors that they do, when you see them do it, even if they're 16, 17 years old, you're like, you know what, you were really stressed out. You took a break, you brought your nervous system down. I'm really impressed. You might use different language to make it sound a little less corny, but that's really important. And then lastly, when you can, and this comes back to the negativity bias, having gratitude. There are things like, we're all together, right? Grandma and grandpa are healthy, however this comes, but having that practice, because a lot of times our brains are wired for the negativity, and having gratitude, even for small things, can really change how we experience our day-to-day life.
So opening it up for another question. This one, Doug, I'll pitch to you. How do you balance the need to educate your child about white privilege and the need to dismantle racist systems with their need to check out and take a break from all the stress and overwhelming nature of recent events?
Wow. So how do you do the balancing act? I mean, that's a tricky one. The thing that I appreciated, or maybe I would lament, going from being a classroom teacher to being a parent, is that it feels like it's never off. And it was finding 1,000 points in which to educate my child. So we can have the conversations around privilege. Like we were taking our dog for a walk in the park, and noting how children were reacting to our dog, or noting how, like at our block party, how police were being responded to, things like that, just even how people could think about it differently. And the great question was, could someone have a different experience on it, and letting the child go with that. I think there are ways that we can kind of keep the conversation going. There are a lot of finally now a lot of great children's resources and books out there to do it. And then being nurturing with our presence and making it this exploration and understanding privilege accessible and thought-provoking and very, very, forefront of their experience as well. Mariann, would you add anything to that too? We've had a lot of conversations around this.
Yeah, no, I think you did a nice job. And we have also included just a few resources as well. And as Mary Jo mentioned earlier, we're building those resources too. But we do have some resources that I think you'll find helpful on our resource sheet.
Yeah, and maybe just to underscore one other point too, it's like the recognizing the need to feel safe, and that's the listening part.
Mm-hmm.
That if we're talking about, like my child was really worried, as streets were closing in our neighborhood and curfews and things like that, like they wanted to have this need to feel safe and to be able to voice these concerns and to talk about it and being able to then work through. It's like, okay, so right now we're talking about safety. And now as we're watching, TV or catching, whatever, or having a discussion about what's in the news, and then we're having that too. So it's like that listening, attending to the need, and being able to engage.
That's great.
Well, Mariann, I'll turn back to you for, I think you have a couple closing slides.
Yeah, I just really wanted to remind you, I've mentioned several times that, and Molly did at the beginning as well, that we're going to be sending you an email after this with a link to this presentation and also some resources that we hope that you'll find helpful. So just wanted to remind you of that, and also that we have a very, I think, fabulous website here called Taking Charge. And I've got the link there for you. I think Molly will also send you that link in our the email that you receive after this. And I just encourage you to spend some time learning more about mindfulness and well-being and resilience tools that you'll find on our website. So, Mary Jo, do you want to say any closing words here?
No, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Apologize that we couldn't get to all of the great questions that had been asked. And do follow us on the center's website and our Facebook page and Twitter for other future upcoming webinars. Thanks very much again for joining us today. Good day.
Thanks, everyone.